Yeah, well, it's an interesting question, and so the idea, whether we call it decay or we call it time, sometimes think time is moving things in ways that's not exactly decay, but it's like growth or development, but ultimately it becomes decay, or sometimes there's an instant destruction too. But time is moving it in one way or another. And that's, again, the idea is that time is a force that operates within the realm of matter. And within the realm of spirit, it has no effect. So this is where spiritual teachings begin. This is where, when we open up the Bhagavad Gita and Arjuna places his dilemma before Krishna, Krishna immediately begins to speak about the difference between matter and spirit. And that's the fundamentals of knowledge. That essentially there's two different forms of energy. Those could be broken down into further categories, but let's first break it into the two. There's matter, which is by nature not conscious, insentient, and also by nature being moved by time, shifting, constantly changing, going through cycles of creation and destruction. And then there's spirit, which we are made of, which is the exact opposite. It can't be killed or crushed or cut or destroyed or anything. It's indestructible. It's eternal. Okay. So how does time play out? How does life play out? How does experience play out in a realm where there's no force of time? Meaning that not only do things not decay, but even a moment doesn't disappear. Even what we experience in a moment remains eternally. That is something, that's a realm that I don't feel so qualified to speak about, which I can accept as a possibility through investigation, but I can't describe to you what that's like. Right? So that's part of this tradition that I have to invest some faith in. Right? That faith has to be built on something solid. Right? There's a huge mountain of stuff that I have that is more tangible or easier to understand. Things that I can apply in my own life and experience, things that satisfy my logical mind or my inquisitive mind, things that I can perceive, with my senses, that adds up, that my faith becomes built on. And I also accept that there's going to be certain things that are going to be beyond the realm of my senses, and even beyond the realm of my speculation or logic, like that. And those things I accept by testimony. It's another type of, that's another type of evidence. But it's only because it's coming from such a culture. Look at what this Vedic culture is. These books, there's something very, whether you accept it, they're going to tell you some far out things. They're going to tell you things that you're going to have to stretch your imagination to believe. But really, doesn't any creation story demand that we stretch that? Whether it's Big Bang, just there was a Big Bang. You're not going to tell me where it came from, what made it go bang, but everything went bang, and then everything just developed into what we have now. Even the most intricate forms of life, the most delicate balance in nature, and so on. It just came. That's going to require a lot of faith too. I don't find those explanations so satisfactory. I found a lot that I find satisfactory within these Vedic texts. But look at part of it is just look at the culture that it comes from. Let's just start with the Sanskrit language, right? This language, and I'm not a linguist, so I'm not so qualified to speak on this, but from what I understand, this language is the most brilliant language that exists. Very, very, very ancient language, going way, way, way back. The computer scientists say that there's no better language for computation. That it has a consistency to it, and it has a flexibility to it that makes it ideal for artificial intelligence. NASA writes papers on this using this language because of the power of this language. So on a scientific level, it's the most perfect language. On an artistic level, when it comes to expressing one's ideas like say in a poetic way, it also becomes a most suitable language in terms of its grammar and the possibilities that the grammar allow for creative expression and artistic expression, in terms of its vocabulary and the specifics that the vocabulary can go into, to going into subtler and subtler ideas. So in a scientific sense, in a poetic sense, in a philosophical sense, what this language is capable of conveying, far beyond most of the languages that we have. So there's some brilliance, some incredible intelligence that was just behind just the language. What to speak of setting aside the philosophy, setting aside the medicine, setting aside like math. You know, the discoveries of like of zero come from here. Of, you know, like all these deep mathematical principles were developed out of this Vedic culture. In terms of architecture, to this day, it's a mystery how they built some of these temples so long ago without the kind of equipment that we have nowadays. You know, the depth of its art, the depth of its poetry, the depth, it's just an absolutely incredibly rich cultural tradition that these teachings spring out of. These were not simple-minded people. These were not backwards people. Whether you accept it as truth or not, if you're truly objective, you'll have to admit that this ancient Vedic culture has a brilliance to it, has a tremendous brilliance to it. So that's part of it, that when I hear these texts, I'm not hearing, it's not something that someone could have just whipped up on their own. You know, you look at the Vedas, the Upanishads, you know, the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata is something like 10 times the length of the Iliad and the Odyssey put together, right? And you read through it, and not only is it entirely captivating on a dramatic level, but it's weaving through it. At every step is brilliant teachings that you can practice yourself and experience. Teachings of yoga, right? Teachings, social teachings, you know, practical life teachings, but yoga teachings. Incredible yogic insights drawn out of it. And of course, Bhagavad Gita. You know, a most brilliant comparative study of everything that's coming before it in the Vedic texts, and then pointing us to higher and higher levels of spiritual realization. You know, then you have Vedanta Sutra, you have the Upanishads, you know, and then you have all the Puranas. And then you get to a text like the Bhagavad Purana, 18,000 verses, incredibly beautiful poetry, incredible systematic presentation of spiritual philosophy, as well as a theology that is not only intricate and consistent and very penetrating and expanding the ways that we can perceive what is the absolute truth, what is God. You know, not a simplistic presentation, but a very thorough, ingenious, mind-expanding presentation. You know, so you look at these texts; they're very, very, very special. Whether one wants to accept them or not, that can be another question. But it's not like just one guy whipped something up and a bunch of naive people accepted it. There's something with a lot of depth here in these texts. So when I hear something about time, and it's beyond what I can stretch, how I can stretch my mind, I'm willing to expand my imagination and see if my knowledge or my experience can hopefully gradually expand to fill that space. I gave an example earlier today, but I'll share it again. You take an iPhone, right? We all have them in our pockets for the most part. And you look at this piece of technology. Now, say you had an iPhone in your hand and you were somehow transported back 300 years. What to speak of 500 years or 1,000 years. And someone said to you, what is that piece of glass that you have in your hand? And you would say to them, with this piece of glass, I can touch it, I can look into it, and I can speak to someone on the other side of the planet. What would they say to you? That's fantasy. There's no such piece of glass. There are stories like Alice in Wonderland written about looking into the looking glass, you know, and speaking to someone in a far distant place. But there's no such thing. That's a story that a person wrote. There's no way that's mythology. No such kind of thing exists. But somehow, here we are, and it does exist, and we're all using it. You know, what does that tell us? Shouldn't we be able to expand our imagination? And we read about incredible things in these books. We read that Lord Vishnu, from his breathing, unlimited universes, we call them metaverses now, right? So many emanate from him, from the pores of his skin, right? We read that Brahma, the creator, with his mind, he can create different forms, different species, right? We're going to read about all kinds. We read that Krishna, with just the pinky of his left hand as a little boy, was capable of lifting a mountain, right? That Hanuman can jump incredible distances. Is this just all mythology? You know? Because certainly these things can't be done, right? But if you just go back, a few decades, people think that what we do with an iPhone now can't be done. The fact was that somebody figured out the science, right? We like to think that we're more scientifically advanced than any other time in the past, But actually, are we? This is a good question. Or did people understand things that we don't understand now? And scientists, of the previous century, like Einstein and Oppenheimer and Heisenberg, they were studying the Upanishads when they were developing their quantum physics, because they looked inside the atom and they saw that somehow in there it was breaking the laws of physics as they understood it. And the only place where they could find any information that seemed to coincide with what they were discovering was in the Upanishads, these ancient texts written by these yogis, spoken by these men with no possessions, living up in these mountains. How were they understanding it? They say that they had the ability to tap into a body of knowledge that's vibrating through the universe. Well, come on, how can there be a body of knowledge vibrating through a universe? Bodies of knowledge we write down on paper, maybe we record them on a computer, but they don't float through the air. Oh, really? Well, isn't it that everything that's on YouTube, every video that's on YouTube, floating through this air right now, right where we're sitting, right? How many videos are on YouTube? I don't know. So much information, a vast body of knowledge is floating in this space right now, and all you need is the right technology to access it, right? But it's floating. And if you would have told that to someone 100 years ago, what are you talking about? No, there are these waves that are going through the air, right? What kind of waves? What do you mean waves? There are electric waves that are going. What do you mean electric waves, But somehow, somebody figured out the science. I don't know how it works, right? But it works. So who are we to say that these yogis were wrong when they're saying that there's a body of knowledge out there and we have the ability to tap into it? Especially when they provided such an incredibly rich body of literature. They're saying we didn't come up with it ourselves, that this knowledge is eternal and exists and it's vibrating through the universe, right? And there's incredible depth to it. There's incredible brilliance to it. So I can expand my imagination and say maybe it is possible, that there's a dimension in which time doesn't affect even our experiences, that we could experience something eternally, and still go on experiencing more. It's like say our world was two-dimensional, say it was just flat, and so we say to someone, meet me on the corner of 42nd Street and 5th Avenue. So these two axes make sense to us. We can say, okay, I understand what you're talking about. I can go to that spot and meet you there. But what if they said, and then meet me on the 11th floor of the building there? And we said, what do you mean 11th floor? That's what are you talking about, right? But no, that's the third dimension, right? A new dimension that would exist that maybe previously we didn't have access to. So perhaps there are more dimensions, more dimensions that make all the things that they talk about in these books that seem like they must be mythology. We can see that it could actually be done. And then you get to deeper theological questions, like why all this apparent mythology? Why all these stories? Why does Krishna lift a mountain? Why does Krishna dance on the hoods of the snake Kaliya? What's going on here? And then the theologians can explain to us in the most brilliant ways, in the most insightful ways, in the most mind-opening and heart-opening ways, what's going on is that these demonstrations have a purpose. Why does Krishna do this? Are you all familiar with this word Lila? Lila? Have you heard this before? Krishna's Lila. His play, his divine play. That according to these ancient texts like Srimad Bhagavatam, that God is not so particularly interested in judging us, not so particularly interested in creation and destruction and these things. As a matter of fact, God kind of outsources those kind of things because God has one real interest, and that is play. You could say, but play through which divine love is exchanged and experienced. It's that experience or that taste of love in all its varieties that interests God and nothing else. Not interested in anything else. That occupies his entire attention. We find the theologians are presenting to us, just see there's a very soft-hearted, tender-hearted, very sweet understanding of God available out there. A God that you don't have to be afraid of, a God that you don't have to have anxiety about, a God that you don't have to resent, because it's just the sweetest person you could ever meet. Right? And all of those mythological stories, they're saying, think about it. They're saying, just like if someone's writing a drama, or let's say someone's writing a screenplay for a film, they take the characters and they put them through struggles. They put them through trouble, through tribulations. And what the tribulations do is they intensify the circumstances. And when the circumstances are intensified, the emotional exchange is heightened. Right? This is what a dramatist does. If you go read a book about how to write a movie script, it's going to tell you that you introduce your main character, you do something with that character to make them likable to the audience, and then you give them trouble. And then you give them more trouble. And then you give them still more trouble. And that's what captivates an audience, and that's what captivates our emotions. And we're saying that idea that script writers use today, its origin is found in the Leela of the original person, the Adi Purusha, Sri Krishna, wherein he lives in a world that's designed for heightened emotional exchange, heightened exchange of love. And so that world has to be creating drama. There has to be all kind of drama in it. The god of rain, Indra, becomes upset at Krishna and his village and pours down a destructive storm meant to wipe them out. Krishna turns to all the people that he loves so dearly, the elderly people and his own parents who love him with the deepest parental affection, right? His own friends, his own buddies, the boys of the village, who love him with the deepest intimate friendship. The young girls of the village, who love him with the deepest romantic love. And he says, everybody relax, I've got this. I'm going to lift this hill and you all come under. Right? Impossible. Mythology. Is it impossible? Is it impossible for something heavy to float in the air? These sages and these yogis are saying it's not impossible. That he could lift it with his little pinky, right? But again, the reason for now everybody comes under that hill, and as the rain and the storm is pouring down, what they're feeling in their heart for Krishna is getting stirred up, is getting intensified. That emotion, that rasa is called, that rasa, the deep emotions that they feel for God, the love for God that every spiritual tradition speaks about, is being spoken about here with an incredibly deep theology to help us understand. We may talk about love of God, but what does it look like? How does it play out? That's all going to be described in these texts, in great detail. There's nothing like that. They're so deep. They're so fascinating. They're so beautiful. They're so poetic. They reveal so much about ourselves, about the world we live in, and about what our potential is. What's the potential of our mind? What's the potential of our heart? All plays out in this text. Any questions about them or any other thoughts? I hope that was all right. Let's see. Anybody? Simple questions, complicated questions, annoying questions, disturbing questions.
Why Krishna choose this way of demonstrating instead of feeling these people with this love directly?
Mm-hmm.
When you chanting mantras, sometimes you overflowing with this love, you blasting. And why he choose this way?
It's just one way that he chooses, but he does it in so many ways. He does it in unlimited ways, and he's willing to reciprocate with every single person in different ways. Some people love Krishna. It's called Shantarasa. They sit in one place, they meditate on Krishna, and they feel love in their heart. They feel bliss in their heart. Shantarasa. It's a literally peaceful, peaceful taste of love. Love in a mode of inner peace, like a sage or a yogi. So that's one variety of love, and it's there. And we hear that there are different sages that experience that love. There are the sages, there is a group of sages that have that kind of love. And they lived in a forest called Dandakaranya. And these sages saw Lord Ram. And they saw Lord Ram with Sita. So they were used to sitting and meditating and feeling this kind of love or bliss within themselves, just as you're describing. But when they saw Ram with Sita, they saw Sita's role and how she served Ram with love. And the way that they kind of recognized there's no deeper way to please him. That they were feeling love for him. And with that love in their heart, they could recognize how special her love and her service was to Ram. And what it did was, within themselves, it created a desire to serve him in the same way, to serve him with romantic love. But the problem is in Ram's Leela, he only has one wife. And so in their next lives, they took births. Due to the deep devotional desire within their hearts, they took birth as gopis in Vrindavan, as the girls in Krishna's village. And in that form, Krishna doesn't just accept one wife, he accepts unlimited lovers. And they all had the opportunity now to love him in a different way, in a way that was intensified, in a way that gave him greater pleasure. And by giving him greater pleasure, they felt greater pleasure. So this is how the great sages speak about the different varieties. He's got unlimited varieties of ways that he expresses love. Krishna is called Akila Ras Amrita Murti, that form of Krishna can reciprocate with all different varieties of love, unlimited varieties. But these sages write really beautiful and intricate texts where they analyze love, they analyze emotion, and so on. It's the esoteric side of these teachings. When we talk about reincarnation, when we talk about the difference between the body and the soul, the nature of the self, the nature of matter, etc. This is kind of the fundamental teachings of yoga, of Vedanta, of bhakti. And then there's an esoteric side, very beautiful side, that deals with divine emotion, divine love, these kind of things. Fascinating books, really fascinating. Very rich tradition. Very rich tradition. Any other thoughts? Any other questions? Anybody in line waiting for prasadam? We take questions from the line back there too. Do you hear me? Maybe not. Anyone else? Ladies in the back? You look inquisitive? No? Yes, sir.
So the other night about different spiritual and religious traditions, and saying that if it's genuine path, people of different religions and traditions, they sort of arrive at the same plane of equanimity, and it would be fair to say that all this path, they are up the same mountain, and they would converge on the same summit. So they will be absolutely the same. Different traditions.
That's a really interesting question. Now, certainly, you see, there are different religious people or spiritual practitioners. They come on different levels. When we come in the beginning, it's not uncommon that our understanding is very shallow. We think me and my people are the only ones that understand anything, and everybody else is mistaken and confused, and maybe even like bad. It's a very simplistic level of faith, and then as our true faith grows, our true knowledge grows, we begin to see what I've understood. They've understood too. What was hidden and I discovered, somehow they discovered it too. So we must be onto something, and their path must also be leading to truth. Right? Now we kind of there's a maturation in the practitioner there. This is good. This is like, it's evidence that they're understanding more and they can see more. Does it all lead to the same place? I would say just like in a mountain and there's a peak, as long as it keeps going up, it'll reach the same place. Sometimes some paths may kind of level off. Yeah, a path may, at least in general, that path may only teach so far. You understand? And then it may level off. But the practitioner always has, if they desire to go further, in one way, my faith is, in one way or another, to be revealed to them. They'll meet that person that'll be able to express more, and they can come further. If within the heart we want to come closer to God, if within the heart we want to know God more, then there's no material impediment that can stop us. It doesn't matter where we are or who we are or what our physical limitations are. That desire transcends material considerations. In one way or another, we'll find it. I wouldn't say that all traditions teach that, the very highest teachings, but I wouldn't even say all for anything, but there's so many very valid traditions that are giving valid knowledge of God. Sometimes, I wish I had this quote with me. I should keep it on my phone just so that I have it. There was a Native American, his name was Black Elk. Has anybody heard of Black Elk before? He wrote a book called Black Elk Speaks. He was like a medicine man, but he was one of the first ones that really learned how to write in English and publish and so on. And this book, Black Elk Speaks, very deep insights. And he writes about what the Native Americans call the Great Spirit. The Great Spirit. The Great Spirit, the consciousness is spread everywhere. The Great Spirit is within everyone. But everyone is also within the Great Spirit. It's so many things. What is Sanskrit for great? Maha is one, or we might say like something that's greater than something. We might use the prefix param, right? Para. And then spirit, Atma, Param Atma, right? Great Spirit. You read about the Paramatma in the Upanishads or in the Bhagavad Gita or in the Puranas. Same term, Great Spirit, Paramatma, right? The higher spirit, the Supreme Spirit, same term, described exactly in the same way. What does Vishnu mean? The one that penetrates everything, that he's everywhere, but everything is in him. He's in the heart of every living being. They came to the exact same realizations. And they go deeper, and they go deeper. You know, how did they get them? You know, they must have a practice that it was revealed to them. They must have a sincerity in their practice that God in the heart responds to. It reveals knowledge to. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, what is it? Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam pratipurvakam dadani buddhi yogam tvam yena mam opiyantite. To one who constantly is devoted to serving me with love, I give them the understanding by which they can come to me. Right? So that sincerity, that desire to serve with love, he's in the heart, he feels it, he responds to it, he gives it like that. I, with the shining lamp of knowledge, what is it? Tesham evan nukam partam maham jnana jam. That I, dwelling in their heart with the torch of knowledge, I'm forgetting the last line now, but 10, 12, I think. 8, 9, 10, 10, 11. But it's there. So I think we need to be careful and not say that necessarily all paths lead to exactly the same place. Right? Because certain paths are encouraging the cultivation of particular desires, and those desires send us in different directions. But if we keep following that path, eventually they come around and start to go in the same direction. Tesham evan nukam partam evam magana jamtama lasayam yatma bhavashto gyana dipena bhajvata. To show them special mercy, I, dwelling in their heart, destroy with the shining lamp of knowledge the darkness born of ignorance. Paramatma, that's Parama, that's the Great Spirit inside everyone. Thank you. Now you have a question, I can tell. Yeah?
I have a question related to one topic you mentioned today on the morning.
Yeah.
So you're talking about you compare this reality to kind of virtual reality.
Virtual reality.
So I have some doubts regarding procreation.
Procreation.
Yeah.
Okay.
What do you think about that in the sense of like if this is all just like a virtual reality full of suffering, basically, and that we tend to go above that.
Just a little.
Yeah. How should we feel about procreating? Because we are putting another human being into the same world of suffering, and that is one of my doubts.
Okay. Very sensitive question. Very compassionate question. Why bring someone into a world of suffering? And let's be clear, it's not only a world of suffering. It's also a world, there's joy here, and there's also opportunity here. Opportunity to understand truth. But let's look at it, let's take one step back and say, actually, we're not bringing anyone into the world. They already exist within this world. We're just bringing them into a certain womb from which they'll take their next body. Right? So they're going to be in this world whether we procreate or not. There's really no soul created. There's a body created that the soul will inhabit for some time. But the soul has existed forever. Right? So nothing's created in that sense. But there's another way to look at this too, is that what is parenthood? What is the dharma of parenthood? What is it really all about? I think perhaps most commonly people are looking at it like, I love you, you love me, let's create another human being that we'll both love and will love both of us, and there'll be a joy in that. That'll be very satisfying. But the yogis, they say there's a deeper responsibility to it. They believe that there's a responsibility in parenthood. Part of the reason why we procreate or we have children is to hand down the wisdom. Is that we need to continually hand this down. And another part of the responsibility is to care for this child in such a way where they will get the knowledge that they need to transcend this world. So now you're doing that soul a favor, right? Rather than bringing them into a world of suffering. They're already in the world of suffering, but you're giving them an opportunity to understand how to transcend that world of suffering. I remember once I was taking part in a ceremony, Gita Jayanti. You familiar with Gita Jayanti? It's the day they say that the Bhagavad Gita was spoken. So I was part of one temple in New York City, and every year we would do this ceremony where we chant the entire Bhagavad. There are two priests. One was Indian, one was American, and they would chant the entire Bhagavad Gita very fast. And with each Sanskrit verse, they would chant Svaha and pour ghee into the fire. And so there was an Indian priest, an American priest, and the Indian priest had a son who was maybe 10 years old, but he had already memorized much of the Bhagavad Gita, and he was chanting along with them. Hey, welcome. Good to see you. And it was my job that at the end of every chapter, I had to like give a synopsis of the chapter in English, like that. And they're going really fast, so I had to think about what I'm going to say, and then I say it. And I don't remember what chapter we were on or what verses I was speaking to, but I was speaking about the tradition in India, the understanding that they have in India, that we have a debt when we're born into this world, in a sense. That everything that we have, our own body, the knowledge that we have, the care that we've received, etc. Everything the food that we eat, the water that we drink and that our body is composed of, the sunlight that gives us warmth and heat and the ability to grow, that all of these things are gifts that are being given to us, and only a person that is not very evolved wouldn't feel a sense of gratitude and a sense of indebtedness. And therefore, within the Vedic literatures, it teaches how you can express that gratitude and in a sense, pay that debt through ritual, through prayers of gratitude, through offerings into fires, and so on like that. But that's there. But I was going on, and then I said to this priest and his son, I used them as an example. I said, our priest here, his father was a priest, and his father before him was a priest. And we could go back and back and back and back. We don't know how far back that chain goes. Now, growing up as an American, our highest principle is freedom. Doesn't matter what my parents did. I'm going to do what I want to do. Right? And in India, maybe it's a little different. It's like I have a sense of indebtedness. And commonly what the parents learned and practiced and brought into with the gift that they give to society, whether it's through knowledge, whether it's through protection, whether it's through generosity, whether it's through service, that they consider that an important contribution, and the family members carry that contribution on, and the family members feel like it's my duty. And so I said, our priest had father, grandfather, great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather. It's been handed down for we don't know how many centuries. They've been making this contribution to society, and nobody wants to be the link in the chain that breaks, right? They want to be like, I'm carrying on the tradition, and that's a noble thing. And so when I was saying this, then he said to his son, you see? You see, I've been telling you this. Now you understand, right? And so having a child. As an American, the idea of having a child may just because it's going to bring pleasure and happiness into our life. But from cultures that I personally feel are more insightful, they'll say it's an opportunity to serve. It's an opportunity to serve God. It's an opportunity to serve this soul that's going to take birth. That they're given these circumstances and they're given the knowledge that they can have to transcend this world. It's said in the Srimad Bhagavatam, you don't become a guru, you don't become a teacher, you don't become a parent unless you're committed to helping that whoever's dependent on you, your dependent, transcend the sufferings of this world. Thank you. How are we doing on time? Okay, so still time. Any questions? Gentlemen that have just arrived, if you have any questions, we'd be happy to take them. Anybody else? Thank you. Time for the next batch of listeners. Huh? You're just listening. Okay, but there's nothing to listen to unless someone asks a question. So if anyone would like to ask a question. Anybody else standing up, just hanging out? Seats are available? Yes.
I don't need the mic.
No, mic is good. It's good.
So in India, we call it Ardhangini. In India, we call it Ardhangini. But in the Western world, we call them the better half.
Oh.
I look at that.
Why do we call the spouse the better half?
Because in India, we call it
And do you call only the wife the better half, or do both sides call the other side the better half? Generally, we call the wife the better half. Huh?
In India, we call it Ardhangini, half of my eyes.
My other half. I can't hear.
Gives same sense. No, it's the better half versus the half. Why better half?
In India, they don't say better half; they just say the other half. And in the West, they say the better half. I don't know that I can't speak to the origins of these phrases, but we can look at it. We can talk about it. We can think about it. Yudhishthira, King Yudhishthira. One day he and the Pandavas are in exile. They're living in the forest, and they're very thirsty, right? And so Nakula says, "I'll go find water." He goes out, searches all over, finds a lake, and he's very thirsty himself. So he's okay, great. I'm going to drink some water, then I'll bring water back for my brothers for Draupadi. So he goes down to drink the water, and he hears a voice. Anyone who drinks this water without first answering my questions will die. Right? And Nakula's like, he's got that Kshatriya spirit. Nobody tells me what to do. He goes, he drinks water, he dies. Have you heard this before?
Yeah, you did not, but
yeah. So one brother, after Nakula didn't come back, everybody was wondering, where is he? So Sahadev goes to find him. Same thing happens. Sees the same water, sees his dead brother, so thirsty that he has to drink, hears the same voice, dies. And then Arjuna, and then Bhima. And then finally Yudhishthira goes. Now Yudhishthira, all of these Pandavas were such great souls. Who cannot love Arjuna? Who cannot love Bhima? All of them. But Yudhishthira, so noble, so wise, so perfectly dharmic, so insightful. Maybe aside from Sri Krishna, maybe the most beloved character in Mahabharata. So when Yudhishthira goes, he sees his brothers, they're all dead, he sees the water, he has to drink. Obviously he's very distraught. And then the voice speaks. Anybody who drinks this water without first answering my questions will die. He says, okay, please ask me your questions. So the questions that come, they're so cryptic, they're so vague, but they're so deep. How to answer these questions? One of the questions, for instance, was, what's the most amazing thing? You're supposed to give a right answer to that. What's the most amazing thing? Do you know what the answer to that question was?
People are dying.
Yeah. Everywhere we look, we see that all creatures are marching into the kingdom of death. And yet still, we think it will never happen to me. That's the most amazing thing.
That's happened.
Okay, so good answer. Another question says, who is the greatest friend? Who is the greatest friend? The answer? The wife. The wife is the greatest friend. So certainly throughout the Vedic scriptures, we hear the glories of the wife, and we also see examples of great wives. Gandhari, right? Gandhari. Her husband is blind. She wears the blindfold herself, right? So there's so many examples. So certainly there are many reasons why we can call the wife a better half. It may be because the wife can bring out the better nature of the husband, right? A lot of times there's a dark nature in the husband and a bright nature, right? But if there wasn't a feminine influence in that life, the dark nature might become stronger and the light nature may go down, but the wife has a way of taking the husband's good qualities, but then magnifying the softer qualities that he may not cultivate: compassion, kindness, forgiveness. Sometimes it's the better half, in that sense, that brings that out. There are many ways that we could look at it. Wives, ladies agree? Yes? Okay. Thank you. Good to see you. Any more questions? See, you have good questions. These are good questions. Anybody else? You always have questions, Jamie. No, not now. Questions?
I remember.
Please hold it close.
Bhagavatam, there's this pastime where
Please hold it close to your mouth so I can.
I remember in the Srimad Bhagavatam there was a pastime where there was a bull and his legs got chopped off by Kali,
Yes.
and in the Kali Yuga, the Iron Age of correlated hypocrisy, the last pillar is truthfulness, satya. And in the previous yugas, there was cleanliness, tapasya, austerity, and
Mercy.
what was
Mercy.
non-violence,
I
ahimsa,
would say mercy, but you can say that, yeah.
and they got destroyed. But the last pillar that's remaining is truthfulness. Could you speak on that? Are we really truthful in this age?
These are the four legs of dharma, right? The four legs that dharma stands on, right? Mercy or compassion. What were they again? Tapasya, austerity, cleanliness or purity, and truthfulness. And it said that the other three are cut down. They hardly exist at all. And it said that truthfulness is the last leg standing, and even that is very weak, like that. So it's a fact. You know, I think more than ever with the in very recent years, when we look at social media and how we get our news and so on. Even when I was a kid, you know, how much could you trust the news? But you could trust it more than now, because nowadays even the news networks, they kind of have each one has their extreme slant. They're kind of just argue with each other. There's not even like pretending that we're unbiased anymore, you know. And the politicians just lie like crazy. And even amongst ourselves in our own relationships, we find it very difficult to speak the truth. And I'm sure the commentators on Srimad Bhagavatam give different reasons why they say that the truth is still standing. I could go and look in those commentaries and see, but my intuition or my first answer to that question is because these texts still exist, right? These texts are the truth. They have truth in them, eternal truth that's been handed down for many, many centuries, and that truth is still available. Somehow it's still there. Somehow it's still preserved. Just like we were talking earlier, that's why there's so much emphasis on handing it down one generation to the next, to the next, to the next. The parent passes it down to the child, and the child passes it down to their children, and those children pass it down to their children. Maharaj, what a joy to see you. What a wonderful joy to see. Sure, such an uninspiring. Or what to speak about parampara, the guru-disciple chain, right? Where there's this very concentrated effort to hand truth down unchanged, or to hand down truth unchanged. That a guru with great care doesn't change the message, doesn't warp a message, doesn't create their own message, but they take the message and they hand it down unchanged. Maybe it's expressed in different words. Maybe it's expressed with new analogies, but the same exact truth is handed down unchanged again and again and again. So we could say, therefore, truth is still standing. It's not as prominent. We don't see it everywhere as much as we would like to see it, but it's still available. It's still being spoken. It can still be heard. And if you search it out, you can still find it. Thank you. Good question. Jamie has a question.
So, somebody who is a devotee, I'm not sure if I'm using the right term, or Hare Krishna, what is the best term to use?
So many terms could be used. Perhaps like if we're speaking to an academic person or a person from the tradition, we might say a Vaishnava, one devoted to Vishnu or to Krishna. That could be one way to say it, but devotee is certainly fine. You know, in this context, we understand what you mean, a devotee of Krishna, a member of the Hare Krishna movement. It's another thing. Certainly there are other Vaishnavas that aren't and other devotees that aren't, but you're speaking about members of the Krishna consciousness movement when you're saying that? Or you may be speaking about broader Vaishnavism.
So somebody who's a devotee and they are presented with conflict, whether that is within the home, say between a wife and a mother-in-law, or siblings, or in the workplace, or between neighbors, whatever and wherever that conflict is. How does a devotee guided to handle that conflict?
Conflict. We live in a world of conflict. We were speaking earlier today about how this world is a reflection of the spiritual world, but in one sense it's the opposite. What's the fundamental difference between the realm of spirituality and the realm of materialism? And the sages would say that within the realm of spirituality, everything is harmoniously revolving around one center. So there's none of this bitter conflict. Where in the material realm, everybody becomes their own center. Woo, so nice to see you. Everyone becomes their own center. And so there's so much conflict, right? Can we become centered around the same principles? You know, that becomes the trouble. Right? If we're in a pond and we keep dropping a pebble on the same exact spot, we'll get harmonious concentric circles emanating from it. But if we throw a bunch of pebbles in at the same time, there's conflicts, right? All the different ripples are colliding with one another. So is conflict good, bad, wrong, must it be avoided? That depends. Sometimes conflict is the right thing to do. Sometimes we need to speak up. Sometimes in order for there to be harmony, there must first be conflict, right? So conflict is not necessarily wrong, but there's a lot of unnecessary conflict in our lives. Perhaps the majority of it is entirely unnecessary. And what the yogis recognize is that when I'm engaged in conflict, most commonly, especially if it's unnecessary conflict, it will occupy a lot of space in my mind. Right? Like for instance, let's say in the workplace there's conflict. Most people that I speak to have conflict in their workplace. Tensions, right? Yes. and we often feel like we're being mistreated, we're not being treated fairly, we're not being appreciated enough. And also that there's usually, I think I was speaking about this last night. I was talking about my wife. I don't know if you were here. I'm not sure if it was in this. I'm speaking in so many different places that I'm forgetting where I share. My wife was a teacher. And she worked in a school in New York City. A private school. These schools are very expensive. It's like going to college, even though it's like preschool, right? Because parents are so concerned about getting their kids, this is a priority in their life. That concern, that intense desire that my child will have a good, nourishing, healthy experience is a very high level concern. Although they don't raise the children themselves, I mean, that's one way they can respond, but they go out and they make the money and they pay a lot of money for it to happen. So you have parents that are very demanding. And then you have a management that feels that tension. And so the management is responsible for the finances of this, and they need to keep the parents satisfied. So they're putting pressure on the teachers, right? So you have this triangle. You have the parents, the teachers, the management, and they're all gossiping about each other all the time. They're all feeling the pressure, they're feeling the tension, they're criticizing each other, they're all feeling misunderstood, they're all feeling not appreciated enough, and they're always talking about it. Right? Now my wife had this, she's coming from the spiritual tradition, and this spiritual tradition is instructing that we want, that the goal in our practice is that we want to take our mind and absorb it very deep in spiritual content. Especially these mantras. We want to be able to take those mantras really deep in the mind. We don't want it to be, sometimes the example is used, great bhakti acharya, great teacher, Ramanuja, he used this term, dhruv anusmriti. that our mind becomes just, it says it's like pouring oil. You pour oil over an object and you just see it just, it doesn't splash around and it just goes right on that object and stays stuck to it, like thick. That our meditation has become thick on the mantra like that. But a distracted mind can't do that. And a mind full of tension can't do that. And when our mind is absorbed in conflict, it can't do that. So what we do is we cut out a lot of blame. We cut out a lot of resentment. Forgiveness is such an important quality. Forgiveness is inherent within bhakti. If you have bhakti, you have forgiveness. If you don't have forgiveness, you don't have bhakti. Because your mind will be disturbed. Your mind will be... See, forgiveness, often we think forgiveness means like letting the person off the hook. I don't like the way this person treated me. I'm not going to let them off the hook, and I'm going to maintain my resentment. And I'm going to talk about it to different people. I'm going to talk about this conflict. I'm going to meditate on this conflict. I'm going to have a loop of this conflict playing in my head all the time. Sometimes we lie down to go to sleep at night and we can't sleep because the conflict loop of resentment is playing in our head. Sometimes we wake up in the middle of the night and the first thing that comes in our mind is that conflict. Have you ever had that before? You wake up and immediately in your mind, that trouble, that conflict, right? I can carry that around with me all the time. But the yogis say that's too much of a burden to carry, because I won't be able to focus my mind the way that I want to focus. So I'm letting this person who's created this conflict, I'm letting them buy space in my own mind. I'm letting them dominate my mind. So not only was there the disturbance of the conflict, but now there's the constant disturbance in the living in my mind. Much worse than the initial conflicts. They said something bad about me. They said something bad about me. In the Gita, again and again and again, Krishna is going to describe the elevated yogi as someone who has samatvam, even-mindedness. Someone says something bad about me, I let it go. Right? I forgive. Because by forgiving, I spare my mind that constant loop. Right? So we might carefully avoid conflict. We might tolerate conflict. We might engage in conflict if we feel that it's important. But in either case, when we've learned to let the insignificant stuff go, then even if we have to engage in conflict, we even learn to let that go quickly too. But if we have no practice in letting the insignificant stuff go, then even when there's necessary conflict, that necessary conflict will be playing in our mind constantly. We need to practice letting it go. We need to become accustomed to it. We need to learn how to do it quicker and quicker and quicker each time, so that even in the midst of conflict, there's no tension in our mind. It's like automatic. The forgiveness is automatic, like that. If we actually learn to do that, we actually reduce the conflicts. If we go to the Yoga Sutras, it gives the yama and the niyama, right? These regulations that we take into our life. Why does the yogi have to do that? Because the Ashtanga Yoga is all about focusing the mind entirely, having an entirely peaceful and steady mind. So Patanjali, right off the bat, this great sage is going to say, we better live in such a way where we're minimizing the conflict. And so the very first principle is, what did I say? Of the yamas, first one, non-violence, ahimsa, right? The commentators like Vyas say that the non-violence is like a big footprint that all the other yamas and niyamas fit inside, right? In one sense, it's all about non-violence, because that kind of conflict is going to disturb the mind of the yogi. So they're very carefully concerned about not creating suffering for other living beings. If I create suffering for other living beings, the conflict and the tension that it creates is going to live out in my own mind. I won't be able to let it go. And Patanjali says that for each of the yamas and niyamas, if you've mastered it, if you've owned it, then there's a specific blessing that the yogi gets, that they can carry with them. Do you know what the special blessing or the special power of one who's mastered non-violence is? Anybody know? It's really interesting. And I've seen it play out in life. I've seen it. If one has fully imbibed and embodied ahimsa, nonviolence, then within, it's said like this. And as soon as I say this, you may say, I don't know if that's true, but I'll try to describe how I believe that is true. But if one has fully embodied ahimsa, nonviolence, then it's said that within their realm, around them, there is no violence. Like others can't commit violence. Perhaps he has that. I don't know so much about him, but yeah. I'll give an example, and I'll give an example of how this played out in my own life. Okay? Perhaps. I once felt very mistreated by someone. Okay. He was a monk. I wasn't a monk at the time. He was a monk at the time. And I think you're going to only hear one side of the story here, but in my mind, he was having an issue with, like, sometimes people are territorial. So he was kind of like, saw himself as kind of like in charge of a certain realm, and he thought my presence in that realm somehow interfered with his own, I don't know, domination of that realm or what influence in that realm. I'll leave it like that. I didn't see it that way. I was just trying to be cooperative, and so he saw me as maybe as competition or something like that. And eventually, he just kind of like 86 to me, like kind of like cut me out of that community, like in a way. I was kind of somewhat shocked, but I kind of just like somehow I had the peace of mind to say, okay, let's just let time do its thing here. But what happened was we were both very close with the senior monk. We both had tremendous respect for this man, right? And that monk was coming to visit a week later. And I'm certain that what happened was he realized that when that monk comes, he's going to ask about me. And then he's going to have to explain what he did and why he did it. And he won't be able to explain it to this person who's so deeply embodied ahimsa himself. Whatever he says is not going to stand up to that man's level of ahimsa. You understand? And he knew it. He knew once I started to try to explain what I did, that this person is going to say, I can't see why you would do that. And then he would feel the weight of that. And so he had to come back to me and apologize and invite me back in. I believe that happened because that other person embodied ahimsa so deeply that that kind of violence couldn't take place in his realm. You understand? So if we become like that, then not only do we get over conflict ourselves, but we actually reduce conflict just by being ourselves, just by embodying the yogic principles in our own life. It's powerful. It's really powerful. I've seen certain people, like this Indraduna Swami over here, to inspire people to do big things like this is very difficult. It's very difficult to get a group of people all moving together. You know what makes it work? Their love for him. They all want to please him, right? If he was taken out of the picture, it would become much more difficult. But when you have one person that deeply embodies spiritual principles and everybody feels it, then everybody starts to cooperate with that and move in harmony around it. And I've seen other people that have that power. It's a really special thing. It means it's someone that's really imbibed these truths and recognized how insignificant the things are that most people get all caught up in, and they just do not tolerate it. They just do not involve themselves in it. They just let it all pass by. They let it all go. That's when you get spiritual power. That's when you can meditate deeply on these mantras, deeply on this truth, deeply in these meditations and these rituals, transform yourself, and then your power begins to spread. It's a beautiful thing to see.
Thank you for that. So, somebody who's a devotee, but they're not around other devotees, and so say they're keeping their old friends, or they're how how because there's going to be different perspectives, and if there's, I guess, if somebody becomes a devotee, then they're probably going to be moving away from certain people if there's negativity or that sort of thing.
Sometimes, we're going to find this on all the spiritual paths, that you get some gift of realization about the value of life, about the potential that you have, about the desire wells in you not to waste this, and you taste something and you feel changed and moved by it. That's the birth. That's our spiritual birth. It feels something like that, right? I remember when I first started hearing all these teachings and it clicked in me. I remember just feeling like it vibrating in my body practically. And I was just thinking, I just need to tell all my friends about this. And once they hear about it, they're going to get it just like I get it. And it doesn't always work that way. I had one group of friends that were into it before me, so they got it. But I had other groups of friends that I was like, I'm just going to tell them about it. And once I tell them about it, they're all going to believe it too. They're all going to be totally into it. And then you go and you find out they're not. And it's one thing, they don't necessarily have to totally buy into everything that you're buying into. But sometimes their behavior, their words, their actions are going to hold you down. And even though you try to explain it to them, they don't understand it. And maybe there's even some resentment. You used to be so much fun. We used to be such friends, and now you've changed. So sometimes we have to become a different kind of friend, a well-wisher, someone that we see them occasionally, and we express our love for them when we see them. But we don't spend so much time with them anymore. Some of them will come along with us. Some of them we have to leave behind. Sometimes it breaks in ways that that are sad. But we have to be courageous. We have to be courageous. We'll never get there if we're not courageous. We'll never get there if we're not willing to let go of certain things that hold us down. So the yogi is always going to try to respond with kindness. Sometimes we know, even if I try to explain it, this person's never going to understand it. Sometimes it's the people that we knew before we got deep into spirituality that will never understand us. But other people will. We'll be able to explain ourselves to other people and they'll get it. Maybe because they know us and they know who we were, they're always going to see us in that light. And they're never going to be able to accept anything from us. Sometimes the most difficult people to explain this to may be our parents, because the parents can never hear it from their children. So there'll be different relationships. The fact is, all spiritualists recognize that the people that we associate with, they affect our minds, they affect our behavior, and we need to be really careful about who we associate, particularly who we associate closely with, or who we associate with a lot. We have to be really careful about that. So sometimes we'll be surprised. Someone comes along. Jiva, who runs the Bhakti Recovery Group here, she was my old friend when we were kids. Yeah, when I knew her, we met when I was 15 years old and she was 13 years old. Yeah. And we were living a life that was like not spiritual, really wild, really wild for such young kids. These are kids living in abandoned buildings, doing all kinds of drugs, just running wild in the streets, lawless streets of New York, So it was a crazy, dangerous world. I knew her in that world. And somehow I got into this bhakti and it pulled me out of that world. And she didn't. And she went down a road of, heroin addiction and so much pain. And it was 30 years later that we reconnected. But I was thinking when she reached out to me, she was wild when we were kids, when she was 13 years old. And I know she's gone through heroin addiction and all of it. Who am I going to be talking to? You know, it had been so long since who am I going to be talking to when I see her? But I saw, no, in her was this deep spiritual understanding, humility, deep spiritual drive in her. I recognized it instantly. I could see it in the way that she expressed herself. And so we were able to reconnect. I couldn't have been with her when she was in her heroin. I mean, maybe I could try to help, but I couldn't be hanging out with her every day like that. Right? It would have dragged me down. But now she came to a point in her life where she reached out to me, said, I want what you're into. And we'll be surprised sometimes. We'll be surprised who reaches out. You know, I have a lot of friends from that previous life of mine who in one way or another got connected spiritually. It's fascinating, the lives that we live and the paths that we follow. Eve? Yep.
I'm coming back to the conflict.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
You're bringing out your fiery nature again.
Yes. Because I keep thinking about forgiveness and anger and conflict. Because I've been through different waves of these years, and sometimes I consider myself an easy forgiver, but I don't know if it's always serving, and I want to ask you, what is forgiveness? Because sometimes it can also be emotional bypassing and avoidance.
It's such a good question.
You always say that.
No, but this one is, I wish I had something with me. It actually goes right back to the conversation that we were discussing earlier. Were you here when we were discussing Yudhishthir and when he went to the lake and he was asked the questions? You weren't here. It was just before you arrived. I don't know if you could pull that up somehow. You know where you could find it? You could find it in the Wisdom of the Sages Instagram group, but you got to go way back. And there's going to be one about forgiveness. That'll just be, there won't be any image. There'll just be texts about forgiveness. But I was saying that Yudhishthir. You familiar with Yudhishthir? Yudhishthir is the elder brother of Arjuna from the Bhagavad Gita. And Yudhishthir is considered the most dharmic person. So much so that it's like, it almost just makes you want to cry. And he was standing before a lake and he was dying of thirst. And he went to drink the water. And he heard a voice from the sky. And the sky said, anyone who drinks from this water before they answer my questions will die. And so he said, okay, please present your questions. And the questions were like these super cryptic questions. Really difficult to understand what the answer is supposed to be. Like one of the questions was, what's the most amazing thing? Okay. And he gave, many of you weren't here, so I'll say, anybody have an idea what is the most amazing thing? What answer do you give to that question? It's relative. But he gave such an insightful answer that this voice from the sky was satisfied. He said the most amazing thing is that we're constantly seeing all living beings marching into the kingdom of death, and yet still we think it won't happen to me. That's the most amazing thing. Our illusion is so strong that we live as if we're not about to die when we are certainly about to die. That's the most amazing thing. Okay. That was the right answer. Another question was, who's the greatest friend? And he said, the wife is the greatest friend. Interesting answer he gave. And he was asked another question, and his answer had everything to do with forgiveness. I forget exactly what the question was, but he spoke at length about forgiveness. And, but I don't think there's something there about forgiveness. Actually, I think it was from a different conversation that he had. His wife was Draupadi. Are you familiar with Draupadi? All 5 Pandavas, all 5 brothers were married to one woman, Draupadi. You think you're fiery. Draupadi was born from the fire. And there was a voice from the sky that said, she will be the death of thousands of warriors. Right? And that was the Battle of Kurukshetra. It was all caused. I mean, there were deeper background reasons for the Battle of Kurukshetra, going back to Mother Earth and how Mother Earth could not tolerate all of these evil kings, the weight of them all. That was the original reason for the Battle of Kurukshetra, why it all eventually played out. But the more immediate cause was the way that Draupadi was treated. That they tried to strip her naked in public, and they said, you are a property now, all of this. That all of the 5 Pandavas took vows. They were all exiled to the forest for 13 years. But they took vows that they say, when I return, I'm going to kill this person. I'm going to kill that person. Bhima took a vow. When I return from the forest in 13 years, I will kill all 100 sons of the blind king, myself. And he said, in the hand, he said the thigh, because Duryodhana, the eldest son, he exposed his thigh in some kind of crude manner and said, Draupadi, you sit here now, you're my property. He said, with my club, I will shatter that thigh, and then I'll kill him. They're making these vows in public. And he said, and then the next eldest brother, Dushasana, he dragged Draupadi by the hair into that assembly and tried to strip her naked. He said, the hand that touched Draupadi's hair, I'm going to sever that hand from his body. And then I'm going to rip open his heart, and I'm going to drink his blood. Okay, so these are like really like, I used to tell that story in yoga audiences, and they're all like, but aren't yogis supposed to be peaceful? But then after the Me Too movement, everybody's like, yes. Like, it was like a whole change of attitude. Everyone was like, yes, bring it on, you know. So anyway, all that had happened, and everyone took these vows that we're going to come back in 13 years and kill all these people. But Draupadi wasn't satisfied with that. She's like, I don't understand why you're not carrying out these vows right now. And she was speaking to her brother. She was speaking to her husband, and she was really upset. Why aren't you doing this? And Yudhishthira is so dharmic and righteous. It was breaking his heart that he couldn't carry out those vows right then. But he was saying, we gave our word. Right? We gave our word, and I'll never break my word. I can't break my word. But he also spoke to her about forgiveness. And he said what forgiveness is in great detail. He went in do you have it there? Okay, let me see if this is it. He really spoke beautifully and eloquently. He had such deep spiritual realization. And hopefully this is it, what it said. Yeah, this is some of it. He says, forgiveness is virtue. Forgiveness is sacrifice. Think about that. You know, different priests, Vedic scientists, they do sacrifice because it causes a change. And sacrifice means we have to give something up. Forgiveness is real sacrifice. You know, we give up our ego. We give up our resentments. Forgiveness is sacrifice. Forgiveness is the Vedas. One who knows this is capable of forgiving everything. Forgiveness is spirit. Forgiveness is truth. Forgiveness is stored ascetic merit. You know, these yogis that go off into the forest and they leave everything behind and they endure the pains that they accrue spiritual merit. He's saying all of that is accrued through the act of forgiveness. Forgiveness is the might of the mighty. By forgiveness, this universe is held together. Right? If there's not forgiveness, there'll be so much conflicts that we just all burn ourselves in a fire of conflict. And then he says this: forgiveness is a quiet mind. Right? Forgiveness is a quiet mind. If we don't learn to forgive, we think we're forgiving to let the other person off the hook. That's not what forgiveness is. Forgiveness is how we let go of the very temporary, the resentment for the very temporary things that come into our life and create some disturbance. If we don't forgive, we carry that tension in the mind, and we never have a quiet mind, And we're never able to advance spiritually because the way that we advance spiritually is we absorb our mind deeply in spiritual content, deeply in mantra, deeply in the wisdom of these texts, deeply in the meditations of our rituals. That's how we transform, is by absorbing the mind deeply into it. And a mind that's absorbed with resentment can never do it. Therefore, the yogi just says immediately, right off the bat, even before it's happened, I forgive. I let it go. Like that.
So does it mean, sorry, thank you.
Yeah.
So does it mean if we don't have the loop happening about the situation happening in our thoughts, that means we have forgiven?
I think that would be a good indication of it. We've let it go, right? As long as it's playing in our mind, we haven't let it go. And then when we finally let it go, that peace comes, right? That peace comes. And the yogi's saying that weight of all of that tension is too much weight to carry. I need to drop it. I need to let it go. So it can become easier and easier and easier once you taste the fruit of it. Once you realize, because I let that go, I'm free now. When you taste that freedom, then you begin to let go real easy because you realize it was just a burden all along. We have this fantasy that I'm going to confront the person and right in front of everybody, they're going to admit how they mistreated me. And then everyone will know. We have these ridiculous scenarios that play out in our minds, and they never come true. They never come true. So the yogi is far more practical and insightful and wise. You just let it go. Yeah.
I will try to formulate it into words.
Okay.
So I have to give example for that.
Please.
So through the trauma of my childhood and teenage time,
Yeah.
I was begging and praying the universe, God, Lord, to make me forget
The pain.
the experience. And I did forget it. But in this, so there is forgiveness into the forgetting of the experience because the loop is not happening anymore.
Okay.
And then that's why I'm talking about avoidance, and there is a thin limit, which I am not having the key of understanding of. Through many, many years, I've forgotten, so I've forgiven. And then this trauma has came back every time I could face them. So there was no total forgiveness into that, because otherwise I would have
It would have been gone.
not faced it again, years and years after.
Okay. So now you've taken the conversation to a place where I want to be clear about something. And that is that there are experts in psychology that deal with trauma. Right? Yeah. So that's not me. I'm a person that teaches about yoga, and this might cure all your trauma. And if it's practiced on the deepest level, it will, but we may not all be capable to do that. So sometimes it's helpful to speak to someone that has an expertise in understanding these loops and how they play out in our mind and in ways that they can be countered. That's one thing I want to say. And I don't want to say that you haven't necessarily forgiven, because maybe there are patterns that play out in the mind that even if we've done a lot of forgiveness, they might come back. So I don't want to tell you conclusively that you haven't forgiven or something like that. I don't want to. I'm speaking in more general terms. Let's be clear about that. Does that make sense? Okay, but we tend to hold on to a lot of pain when we don't have to. Some of it's going to be so extreme, or it has affected us so deeply that it'll be very, very difficult for us to let go of. So we must try. Part of the way to forgive, this is real important. and it's part of the vision of the yogi. And it's part of, we've been talking about samatvam, even minded, but then there's samadarshana, equal vision. It means that we become capable of forgiving anything when we really understand that whatever act was committed, if it's wrong, if it's adharmic, it's not, there's a soul within the body that was expressing something that came through a warped mind. And that's why it became violent, and that's why it became destructive. It's, the soul itself is pure, but when it's filtered through the warped mind, the desire of that soul becomes destructive. And underneath, what is the desire of that soul? And it's going to be the same in everyone. And you know what it is? Love. Practically everything is just an expression of our need and our want for love. But that can come out in very warped ways. It can come out in ways that become the polar opposite when it comes through a warped mind. And so the yogi sees that it's unfortunate that through this person's experience, their mind has become so warped that their desire for love is expressed in warped ways. I forgive them. I pray for them. I hope that their mind may be healed so that the purity that's underneath in there can be expressed in a pure way. That, yeah, forgiveness can look like that. All right, thank you. I think we may be out of time for tonight. Thank you so much. You all had such really, really good questions. I really enjoyed spending this time with you. We'll be back again tomorrow evening. Tomorrow morning we don't have the class at 9 o'clock because it's Mondays. We don't do it on Mondays, but we'll be back at 9 o'clock on Tuesdays between 9 and 10, and every day except Mondays between 9 and 10. Thank you all so much. Hope to see you again soon. Hari Om Tat Sat.